Psychology. Thanks for being here again. Well, let me introduce our next speaker. Let's see how I can summarize in a few words the long CV of Alicia Grande. It's a challenge, but I think I will be able. So Alicia is a really well-known professor in the field of organizational psychology. She's working at the Pennsylvania State University in the US. And she has published several papers. Some of them are an important reference, especially in the topic of emotional labor, but she's also working in other topics. Today, the talk will be about menopause and workplace. Alicia is one of the really top authors in our field. Is within the top one most cited author, so is an indicator of her relevance in the field of OP. And obviously, she's also focused on trying to close the science-practice gap, and she writes also more general papers for instance, Harvard Business Review or Conversation. She's also in the Workplace Initiative with interdisciplinary scholars and this industry advisory board. And currently she's serving as associate editor of the Journal of Applied Psychology, and also has been working as associate editor in another relevant journal as Journal of Occupational Health Psychology. So Alicia, welcome and thanks for coming. Your turn.
Thank you. Good morning. Let's see if I can make this happen.
Yeah.
Okay. I usually like to move around a little bit, but I'll stay seated so the microphone works. So a little bit about me, about my professional and personal selves and how they meet. This is my 25th year at Penn State University. It's a long time to be in one place. I love working with students. This is my current grad students on the screen. And up above, you see me with a former grad student friend. We're writing a book now on emotional upskilling for today's leaders. Connected to that, in my personal life, I'm also very connected to Penn State with my children, you see on the upper right there, who my daughter is going to Penn State. My son has played lacrosse with the Penn State workshop. My mother lives in the area, that's her on the bottom. She used to live or was born in this area and now is back and going to football games, American football games with me. And I also love to go to New York City and see theater. Oh, and I have a cat. It's very important. So I bring this up because what I've realized my research is about is that intersection where the personal and the professional meet and often collide. When I first started doing research as a graduate student, I was doing work-family or work-non-work conflict. So how the personal relationships we have with our families and our children can interfere with our work lives, our work selves. Emotional labor became about how our personal feelings might be in conflict with what we're expected to show, whether that's smiling or being stern. And then diversity and mistreatment research came out of one's personal social identity maybe not being a good fit with what's expected in the workplace. And this has led me to realize that what is very important to me in my research is to look at this connection from three angles. So when I want to study something new, I think, okay, what is my lived experience? Does it resonate with other people? Do we have a lived experience that is worthy of study? I then see if there's a research gap, and then I make sure that there is a real societal problem at a larger scale. So today I'm going to be talking about menopause research as it relates to these three things. I have lived experience. I have gone through the menopausal journey, and I've also been at work where when I was having experiences, I was told to not say anything, to keep it quiet. I did a review that was published in 2020 on the taboo 3 M's of a working woman's life. Do you know what the 3 M's are for a working woman? and they were brought up yesterday in the session: menstruation, maternity, and menopause. And these are three aspects of a female body that cannot be denied. They are human nature, they are natural, but they don't fit with the norms and expectations in the traditionally masculine design of work. And today I'll be talking about menopause as the one that we have the least research about, so where there is the most research gap. And then societally, I've been seeing more and more attention to menopause. Now, it is true that when you start to study something, you see it everywhere. You see it all the time because it's in your mind. But I think you will recognize this when I show you the ads. So this is our summary of the 3M's idea, which is that at the top you see the work career phases and what is expected of employees, and at the bottom you see those 3M's that I mentioned. So we have certain expectations and ideals at each stage of what are we looking for in the ideal worker. And these are ways that it might be thought that the 3M's interfere with those expectations. And as I mentioned, this is something that is natural for women, but whose bodies may be seen as other or as less than. So this is a quote from Joan Acker, a famous feminist scholar. Women's bodies, their pregnancy, breastfeeding, and childcare menstruation are stigmatized and used as grounds for control and exclusion. Now, this was written in 1990, so a while ago. Maybe it's not true today. Maybe it doesn't apply to menopause. Menopause is when menstruation and maternity are no longer happening. So maybe we get rid of menstruation and maternity and it's all good. We're good. Now we're the ideal worker, right? Well, let's see. We'll see what we say. And the societal problem that this might help address is while we have gender parity in the European countries and the US in terms of equality of representation, about half of workers are female, we see gender disparity, differences in terms of leadership. And this gets greater and greater with fewer and fewer women representation as you go higher in the organization. And what's interesting to note is that gender disparity, where it's greatest, CEOs, is around the same age as when menopause occurs. So menopause on average is completed around 51, 52. And most people reach the CEO or the C-suite around 54. So the timing lines up such that people are moving into leadership roles in their 40s, early 50s, same time as the perimenopausal or menopausal change. Maybe this is a coincidence that women do not move up at the same time. So there is a lot of media suggesting it's not just a coincidence. So this is examples of media articles, news articles from a variety of places. Some of them are in the US, some of them are, the UK has been very active in talking about this. You see here the BBC. A lot of suggestion and examples of stories of women leaving the workforce or being denied a promotion because of menopause or menopausal symptoms. So first, let's clarify what is menopause, because if you're anything like me, you don't worry about it until it happens, until it is you. So menopause is actually 3 stages, and we often refer to all 3 when we mean menopause. So the first stage, the perimenopausal stage, is the change, where the most change happens. And this is when we see the most symptoms. This can last anywhere from 1 year to 10. It can be a very long time, it can be very short. It can be very intensely distressing, and it can be nothing at all. Women differ greatly in this experience. And this is important for later, for a point later. But it's starting, it's changing, the estrogen levels are changing particularly. They don't just slowly decline, they change rapidly and eventually decline. And this fluctuation is what creates these symptoms and experiences. Menopause is when no menstrual cycles have happened for 12 months. That's it. That's the entire definition. There's no test. There's no, you don't get tested for it. It's simply, how long has it been since your last period? 12 months. And if you have gone 11 months and then you have one little one, oh, you got to start over, 12 more months. And then, so at this point, okay, it's been 12 months. You're now a menopausal woman, and everything after that is post-menopause. Now, you might ask, what are the symptoms? We already heard about them yesterday when we talked a little bit about the menstrual cycle symptoms, very similar. So again, this is partially because the cycles are changing. They become problematic again. It can be fatigue and body aches. It can be headaches. And in particular, there's one that's very specific to menopause, which is the hot flash, which I will talk more about shortly. But this is a natural aging process. All of you in the room that have a uterus will probably go through this, but we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it, so we don't prepare for it, we don't know, and many doctors don't talk to us about it. And maybe it's different in Spain, and please tell me if that's true, but in the US, in the UK, we don't talk about it. There are two main lenses of how it is studied in the research. So one is from a feminist psychology lens, which takes the idea that this is neither good nor bad, but it is a shift. It is a change. And it's a chance for a woman to imagine new things for herself. She's leaving behind an identity that could have involved children. She's leaving behind maybe the annoyance of a menstrual cycle. So that's nice. And it's also a time of generation and creativity and looking to what is next. Often that is giving back, doing something for others, being pro-social. It can also be a time where there is a collective action, as we heard about yesterday, where people get angry and realize things are unfair and unjust and wanting to make it better for the next generation. So many different reactions from this perspective. The more dominant lens is the medical lens, and the medical lens focuses exclusively on the symptoms. This means that menopause is seen as a syndrome, it's seen as a disorder, it's seen as being unhealthy, and the symptoms that are experienced are then the source of problems. So if we look at the research, the feminist lens interviews women or surveys women, so it gets the women's experience and perspective, and it asks them what it's like to be menopausal. And I'm, as an organizational psychologist, I'm interested in how it is experienced at work. So here you see a quote from one of the women in the study. I'll try to come over here so I don't get off the microphone. She says, "So we're too young and stupid and sex objectish," being a sex object, and then we're too pregnant and maternal and worried with child-caring duties. And then we become dried up crones who, can't contribute to the workplace. So in other words, you can't win. Now this is her experience, this is her perspective, but that is how this lens tries to understand it. So from the medical lens, the focus has been on understanding the frequency and the prevalence of different symptoms. As I mentioned, the hot flash is one of the most notable markers that is specific to those changing estrogen levels. It means that our bodies become a superpower where we can sense changes in temperature very, very well. And so as soon as it goes 1 degree higher, you feel hot. And that can be observed by others. Other symptoms, as I mentioned, can include things such as body aches and insomnia and fatigue. So these symptoms, when they are reported by women in the medical journals, are linked to women's reporting of their own performance and their likelihood of wanting to quit or leave work, and they find a positive correlation. So if I am knowing my symptoms are very distressing, I also say I'm not working as well, right? So that's what we know from that research. But you also hear women say, we should be allowed to experience this without stigma. I want to embrace it. It's natural. There is a physiological reason why this is happening, and there is not a lot I can do. It's not as if I've done anything wrong, right? So stigma is the idea that it's something wrong. So this is the lens that I will take in the research I will present to you. The question, these women's experience have described menopause as a stigma, and we know societally it can be seen as a stigma in that we don't talk about it. But how does that stigma translate to the workplace? And what does that mean objectively for workers? So again, a stigma is something that is devalued or deviant from the norm in that particular context, so contextualized. And so again, there can be cultural differences. Perhaps it is not stigmatized in one country, but it is in another. Perhaps it is not stigmatized in one occupation, but it is in another. And there are two ways we can think about stigma. One is that it is an identity stigma. So simply the label, menopausal woman, is a stigma. Being told, oh, you're a menopausal woman, right? It's similar to being told, oh, you're having your period, and seen in a negative, devalued way. And then there's physical stigma, which is things that there's disgust reaction to. So menstruation is one example, and hot flashes or sweat is another. So physical stigma, because it's observable, the hot flash is something that a coworker could see, can also signal the woman's identity. So even if her menopausal identity is unknown or she doesn't even know it, having a hot flash could let people at work know that she is menopausal, if they're aware. So these two fit together, and I'll talk about both of them in this research. So the nice thing about stigma is that there is a long stream of research in social psychology recognizing the role of stigma, and I will be drawing on the social cognitive lens of stigma to develop predictions and interpret the research. So the idea of this model is that there is identity stigma, that once one is identified as menopausal, if that does carry stigma, that will activate stereotypes that are unfavorable for that context. And in the workplace, agency, which we've heard about yesterday, agency being highly competent and strong and proactive and confident, could be less, because by being menopausal, you're now activating a very feminine, an illness, things that might be seen as not agentic. And if so, because agency is linked to leadership, that may mean she is excluded from power. So that's the idea of social stigma. As stigma is identified, it is something devalued in that context. It's seen then negatively for that context, and those beliefs mean I keep them out. I want to exclude them from power. We don't want them here. So I'm asking whether this is playing a part in explaining the leadership disparities for women in the workplace. So I'll give you evidence for 3 questions. Is menopause linked to these unfavorable stereotypes, which we don't know? I could find one study that looked at stereotypes of menopausal women, and it was done in the 90s, and it was not in the workplace. So we need to ask that question. 2, does menopause reduce leadership due to those stereotypes? So is it linked to leadership at all? And 3, what do we do? What can we do about this if it's true? So I'll be drawing on the basic idea of occupation stereotype fit, which is if leaders are supposed to be agentic, so strong, competent, confident, then we want employees that match that, right? That fit with that occupational expectation. Middle-aged women, interestingly, are seen as becoming more agentic as we get older. So younger women are seen as less agentic, seen as more feminine, more warm and friendly. But as we get older, we start to be seen as more strong and confident. And middle-aged workers are in the golden age of their career, right? They have expertise and knowledge, and they are healthier and seen as stronger than older workers. Yeah, so middle age is the perfect, ideal stage, supposedly. Menopausal women are middle-aged women who are simply experiencing this natural health experience. So the question is, does menopause make them lose the benefit of being middle-aged, which should be a benefit to these stereotypes of agency and becoming leaders? So the first question. So looking at working adults, we assigned them to one of 3 conditions. And we asked whether they would be seen differently in terms of agency as well as in other attributes. And what we are doing here is comparing men and women, so middle-aged, all middle-aged. So we can compare men and women, and then we can compare menopausal women to middle-aged. So we can do both with this process. So the biggest interesting thing, I think, was that there was no difference in terms of cognitive ability. They were not perceived, menopausal women were not perceived any differently. These are not significantly different. We see a slight gender difference there, but it's not significant. And menopausal women seen as just cognitively competent as middle-aged men. Where we see the difference is in terms of instability, anxiety, lack of confidence, items like that. So both are agency, being competent, and being confident. But confident is where we see menopausal women losing that judgment. Now again, I want to remind you what I said about individual differences. Some women may experience anxiety, as we heard yesterday about mental illness. Some women may experience it more strongly when they're experiencing menopause. Some women do not. The point here is the stereotype is all women who are menopausal are anxious and lack confidence. Okay? So we're applying a stereotype to the entire group that is not true for the entire group. But this is not a realistic comparison. Right? I don't go into the workplace with a sign that says menopausal woman, right? I don't go around telling you that that's my status. So it's not a realistic comparison. What we also note in this study was that the menopausal women were also seen as more likely to have hot flashes, which is accurate. So that became the focus of the rest of the studies. If hot flashes are more likely to be occurring, are those used as information to activate these same stereotypes? So this second study is using archival data of middle-aged people in the United States and asking whether there is just a relationship between menopausal symptoms of hot flashes and later leadership in time. So, if you're becoming a leader, it takes time. You get identified as someone that's got the potential. You do some trainings. Maybe you start out at a middle manager, and then you work your way up. Right. So looking over time about what are the symptoms experienced at wave 1 as people are going through the perimenopausal stage, those early years, that should relate to whether years later they are moving into the leadership positions. And we use the hot flash symptoms, the frequency and intensity of those, as a signal that one is menopausal, and see if that matters beyond age or gender. So very quickly, this is the logistic regression results where we have time 1 and time 2, and we see the typical gender disparity where men were more likely than women to be leaders later in time. If you had a leadership role before, then you're more likely to have one later, as we would expect. Age was minimally related, but that's probably because it's all people in middle age, so we don't have very young or very old people in the sample. Hot flashes were negatively related. So again, notice this is over time, across many years, a negative relationship between having hot flashes. The more women reported having hot flashes, the less likely they were to be a leader years later. And this relationship became even stronger if we focused only on the women. So women who had more hot flashes were less likely to be leaders than women who did not have as frequent hot flashes. Now, you could argue that could be due for many reasons. Women might choose not to become leaders, right? They might not feel confident and avoid the roles. So we can't assume this is due to stereotypes and stigma, but it shows a relationship. So then the next question is, can we show that menopause, if we control for everything else, if we take into account all other factors that differentiate women and from each other, is menopause a predictor of leadership? And is that due to stereotypes? So to ask this question, we created some experimental vignettes. So this is a very social psychology approach where we have our control condition, where we have middle-aged women with no symptoms in the orange. We create a scenario where a woman is observed having a hot flash, so she's described as, and she's fanning herself, and you see some sweat on her, and she's kind of looking for a tissue in her bag, and then in a third condition, all of that happens, and she labels herself as menopausal, just to be very clear. It is menopause. So, and this is set up in a work meeting where there's a professional meeting happening. We're talking about a project report, and the woman does the work of the meeting just fine. So we're holding constant performance. She performs very well, but she's having this hot flash where she has to step out for a moment and then returns to the meeting. So the first thing to notice is that there were gender disparities in leader ratings, but only when she had the hot flash. So this difference here, where there's no hot flash, this difference is not significant. The man was slightly preferred as the leader of the future project when asking participants, who would you like to have lead the project in the future? The man that was in the meeting who did not have any symptoms was seen as more desirable, but it was not. That's not different. Middle-aged woman, middle-aged man, equal. Now that makes sense, because remember what I said about middle-aged is seen as the prime time. They also rated, by the way, young people in the meeting. They were not preferred. The two middle-aged people were preferred. When we see the difference, as you see here, is both when she is observed having the hot flash and when she's observed and labeled as menopausal. Okay, so that's when the gender disparity exists for middle-aged people in the work group. And again, remember, this is something that menopausal women are very likely to experience, and it's not really controllable. There's really nothing you can do, as that quote said. Are you understanding? Am I talking too fast? No. Okay, good. I talk very quickly, and I'm trying to slow down. Thank you. So this is comparing it to the stereotypes. So first, just comparing having a hot flash to no hot flash. You see a reduction in agency, where the woman having a hot flash, even though everything else in the meeting is exactly the same, she's performing just as well, simply observing her having the hot flash, she's seen now as less agentic, less confident and competent and strong. Everything else is the same across these two groups. And we can show that when looking to see does that relate to leader judgments, it is via the agency judgment. So there's a significant indirect effect where the person having the symptom versus not having the symptom is less likely to be a leader due to being seen as less agentic. It is not due to being seen as warm. Now, by warm, I'm referring to the stereotype of kind and trustworthy and sympathetic. So someone that has symptoms, we might think they're very sweet. Yeah. So we might have a very benevolent view towards them, and that was seen. So the symptoms does increase a judgment of, poor her. And that does not predict leadership. So the effect was not via that. Now what happens in that third condition? So the woman has just reported, you see her having the hot flash, and then she says, I'm having a hot flash again, it's that menopausal stage of life. So clarifying that it really is a hot flash, that is menopausal. What happens in this condition? We thought it would make it worse. Right? From an identity stigma angle, you've just clarified that you have an identity that is stigmatized. So that should be bad. That should worsen it. And remember that first study that showed that this identity was seen as less emotionally stable and less confident, yeah? When she does this, it improves. Now she's seen as more agentic, even though she's just labeled those symptoms as menopause. And we thought, that's interesting. She is doing an action that is agentic. Let's look more at that, as maybe that's a way to override this problem. This identifying of menopause versus not saying anything enhanced the judgment of agency. She's now seen as more agentic, and that enhanced her desirability as a leader. Oh, she can speak up for herself. She can take action when needed. She's not ashamed of the symptoms. Maybe. Or maybe there's something else going on. We need to replicate, and we need to see what else might be happening. So this third study is asking this question. Okay, so what helps to address stigma? Does saying I'm menopausal make it better? That seems surprising. So what we do is we look at whether any identification, knowing that she's menopausal in any way, that might help simply because it reduces uncertainty. Right? You know now why the hot flash is happening, and that might make you less wondering, less concerned, less distracted, because you, as the observer, now understand why. Or is it that by being self-disclosing, it is an agentic act itself, and that is what is helpful? So we compared her saying, I'm menopausal, to someone else saying she's menopausal, in a kind way, by the way. So we had the same scenario of a meeting. The woman has the hot flash, and then she steps out of the room, and then she comes back and says, oh, I'm sorry, I'm menopausal, I was just having a hot flash. Or someone else, when she steps out of the room, says, oh, it's okay, she's menopausal, she's just having a hot flash. So same information, herself being agentic versus someone else revealing the identity. Okay? So what you see here is that the self-disclosure, as we found before, enhances the agency. So compared to just seeing the symptoms, which we know decreases agency, compared to no symptoms, symptoms identified by the self as menopausal enhance agency and reduce emotional instability as well. So now she's seen as confident, less anxious, and more agentic, simply by actively labeling them. What happens when the peer says, oh, she's menopausal? Does that make it worse? Make it better? It was not significant. Now what you can see in the trend is that it's about the same, so there's no difference across any of the groups. It's not as good as self-disclosing. So we conclude from this that it's the self-disclosure that is the agentic act that is really helping. But I do want to notice that being an ally, saying for your friend, it's okay, she's menopausal, she'll be right back, she's having a hot flash, didn't hurt, didn't make the judgments worse, which I think is very interesting and helpful for us to know what to do to help our friends. So we see, again, an indirect effect where disclosing versus not disclosing increase the likelihood of leadership emergence due to increased agency. And we also had varied conditions. We looked to make sure the respondent, the observer, the gender of the person, that didn't make a difference. Men and women responded similarly, and that's true across all of these studies. So men and women have similar stereotypes in their minds about menopausal women. It also did not vary by the gender ratio of the work group. So we varied whether the group meeting was all men and in construction engineering and very masculine versus one that was a more mixed gender environment, same effect. So it did not make it worse to do it with all men. So the last thing I want to leave you with is an answer to the question, but do women really do that? Is this realistic? We asked employed women in a variety of industries if they'd ever either experienced or observed someone having a hot flash and disclosing at work. And a majority had experienced and observed it, and you see variability in whether they had observed or experienced disclosing or sharing the information. So about a quarter, no, would not disclose. But the 75% would. Some would do it to just a few people. Some would say, sure, I disclose. Why not? So that suggests all of our conditions are realistic, not disclosing and disclosing. And I think it's interesting to see, again, from the women's own voices, why they would or would not disclose. So when asked why they would not disclose, they describe shame and embarrassment, which is about stigma, which is the knowledge, the awareness there is stigma. And fearing costs, being denied or excluded, just like the stigma model suggests. Those who say they would disclose override the stigma. They decide to ignore it, and they say, we're talking more about this in my generation, so this is a younger woman. It reminds me of getting our period, let's talk about it. And then they also just say this is natural. We should be able to talk about this. So in summary, there's some evidence for this stigma model, but interestingly not as strongly about the menopausal identity as the costs of menopausal symptoms, but which signal the identity and can create negative outcomes for the leader disparity, but particularly if we're passive about it. Being passive and not doing anything may seem like if one is hot and fanning, it might look like they are anxious or uncertain or not confident. And so by labeling it as it's menopause, it will pass, it's not forever, it's natural, now it is seen as more consistent with expectations of leaders. I am strong, I'm not ashamed, this is me. And I think that is a very powerful message. Practically, I think this is important to recognize in terms of how we just need more education of this is what is happening if people are observed having these experiences, so that we can have both for ourselves, we know what's happening, because often when it starts to occur around early 40s, you have no idea. You think you're having a heart attack. You have no idea what's happening, because no one has told you. But educating can help us, oh, okay, this is just a hot flash, it will pass. And then allyship, being able to, oh, she's just having a hot flash. It can also create connection. If women in the room have ever been in a meeting and you look over and you see someone, oh, it's so hot here, and you can look at her and go, I know, we have a connection. And then in the workplace interventions, it's so simple. It's so simple. A little fan, €5, just blowing some air. And the sad thing is many workplaces don't allow small personal effects, small personal devices. It is such a simple fix. Easier than, yes, very good, thank you. Easier, and a fan, yeah, that kind of fan as well, yeah. It's easier than, most workplaces don't allow you to change the thermostat, yeah. So having something you can have for yourself is very simple. Uniforms. Many uniforms have to be worn a certain way. The fabric can set it off, and if it cannot be changed or adjusted for women, that is also a problem. And then, of course, creating a climate where people feel comfortable sharing the personal and the professional, such that they can be accommodated in ways as needed. Again, recognizing some women, it will not be any problem at all. For some women, it will be very extreme, and they might seek medication and other sources of support. And of course, since the pandemic, flexible work and remote work is also helpful. Being able to be at home, you don't feel as stigmatized as being in person. There are many future directions for the students in the room or the young scholars. This is not something that we have studied very often in our field in terms of the workplace. So many other ways we can look at this. We can look at other symptoms besides hot flashes. We can look at other outcomes that matter. We can look at how people are treated rather than simply the decisions about her. And we can look at the efficacy of workplace interventions. So I'd like to thank my collaborators. I have many wonderful students and faculty from social psychology and feminist psychology, as well as organizational psychology, working on this project with me. And I would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Alicia. It was wonderful. I really like the fact that you emphasize life experience, because I think that's what makes the difference nowadays with artificial intelligence. artificial intelligence can do anything better than us, but they cannot have life experience, so I think that's the key. And I was a bit surprised when you were talking about how menopausal women have more emotional instability, I think you were saying. Maybe I'm projecting, but I think I feel better than ever, and I have much more life experience than I had before, and I have less insecurity, and I feel very, very confident about what I do, and I don't have the kids to take care of them. Well, I have them, but they're older, so they're not my problem anymore. So I was wondering that I think it's probably very important to analyze, to do epidemiological studies, because I think if you compare all the women with younger women, I think we're doing much better than they are, because they have so many things going on, and we are settled. I mean, we have good jobs and good money, and we have life experience, which I think is key. And I was thinking maybe it depends on the profession. So I was going to suggest that maybe latent class analysis would be very helpful to identify different profiles. But anyway, I thought it was wonderful, and I think we should do more work on these type of things that is probably not done enough. Thank you.
I want to clarify, my findings were not that women experienced more emotional instability. They were seen as being more emotionally unstable. They were stereotyped as that. But to your point, I think it changes over the perimenopause to menopause life stage, right? So at first, because it's uncertain what's happening to my body, I think there can be some instability. And I know the evidence about mental illness is not that menopause causes anxiety and depression, but if a woman was prone to anxiety and depression previously, it can come back due to, again, the fluctuations. But then later in the process, I think there's more likelihood, the postmenopausal experience is what you're describing, where it's, I'm settled now. I don't care anymore what people think. And now I can go and make a difference, yeah? Yeah, so it's interesting because it's dynamic, yeah, which makes it difficult to study also. Thank you.
You have two? I think it was a little bit there.
Hi, Alicia. Very interesting work, and I love the progression of the studies as well. One thing I was wondering a little bit about, and there probably won't be any research about this, but you might have your ideas about it, is would this effect of disclosure also occur in other types of cultures? Of course, the US is quite an individualist space, and would it be the same in more maybe less egalitarian cultures or collectivistic cultures? Could you speculate a little bit about that?
I think that's wonderful, and I would like to know if anyone would like to collaborate with me on such a project. I mean, it makes sense that Americans are certainly very, let me tell you about myself, yeah. But I think that also I believe that it's been shown globally with the social media, it's all about self-expression and showing who we are on the inside. So I think there's also a generational difference that maybe is overriding some cultural differences. I don't know. I did talk to someone in Japan who mentioned there it is not only somewhat more collectivistic, but also very strong power hierarchy, power distance. And so that might be one place where it would be seen as very unusual to share something so personal. Yeah, so there is very likely some cultural differences for sure.
Thank you, Alicia. It was very nicely built up, also the argumentation. But I'm still wondering, at home we have also, my partner is also feeling sometimes warm, particularly when we are in Greece with 40-something degrees in the summer. And so I'm wondering, why do people consider this as a kind of, something to be stereotyped for when a woman has a hot flash? Men can also have it. Is that because it looks a bit similar to a stress reaction or anxiety reaction?
So there is evidence in the Midas about men having hot flashes, but it's a very small percentage. And we did do a study where we compared a man and a woman, observed both having a hot flash, and they were similarly seen negatively.
Oh, negatively.
Yeah.
And because of that then? Because people think, oh, this person feels insecure or stressed? Or why would that be then a problem if people feel a bit warm ever?
I think the difference is that it's, the way it's described is it's in a room where you are the only one having the experience. So the attribution is it's something about you.
Oh, yeah.
It's something as unhealthy about you. No one else is hot. You know, obviously if we all were in a warm room and we were all doing this, no problem, right?
Yeah.
But if it's only you, something's up with your body.
Yeah.
And that's where the stereotype happens.
And you know about midlife crisis of men, eh? Is there also research on that?
I'm sorry, say that.
The midlife crisis.
Oh, the midlife crisis for men,
so
yes.
something,
Yes, what is the stereotype of men having a midlife crisis?
Is that
I'm curious what it is in Spain. What is it? A Ferrari, yes. A fast car.
Yeah.
What else?
So.
A woman, a younger woman and a fast car, yeah? That's the stereotype of a midlife crisis for men.
Yeah.
So a woman having a hot flash doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah.
Less expensive and not as trouble.
I think that the man should be, is taken less serious if he or she is in the midlife crisis and there is just a little symptom that this person really experiences that. I would say that there is more negative, more negative effect actually.
Yes,
that,
exactly. Yeah. But what it is, the fast car and the younger woman, is agency. It's being shown I'm strong and virile, even though I'm also. I mean, men are losing testosterone very, very gradually. That is linear, right? Where ours is going like that. Yeah. So the linear trend of testosterone is also creating threat in men. And the responses are to reclaim the power and the agency, but in ways that are rewarded. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So before I go for my Ferrari, I also had a question for you.
Me too. I want a Ferrari.
I was a bit surprised about your findings regarding the differences, gender differences in stereotypes. So maybe I misunderstood, but it's like that you didn't find differences in stereotypes, whether your participants were males or female, right?
So in the study, so in the study where there's a man and a woman who are both middle-aged, they were observed where the man was slightly more likely to be seen as the leader, but it was not significant. Yes. Until she had the symptoms, and then there was a difference.
Yeah. No, but I was thinking about the participants.
Oh, yes.
So no gender differences?
No gender difference in any reactions to any of the conditions.
Right, and, well, at least some thoughts on that. It's surprising, no? Especially if you mix it up with age, maybe.
Yeah, so that makes some sense. I think the argument there is if there is a menopausal woman in the sample, she should understand what is happening and view it less negatively. That intersection of age and gender is a small sample, so we probably wouldn't find a significant difference, because it's so narrow. But I think what it shows is that we all hold those stereotypes, unless you've had the experience, perhaps. But young women, older women, younger men, older men, we don't know about menopause, and we have beliefs that are informed by our culture and our society about what is a good leader and what is a menopausal woman like. Whether we accept them or not, and whether we want to believe them, they are in the air. And so I think that is why it's ignorance and lack of awareness of that might be what's happening. That's why I want to talk about it.
Makes sense, yeah. Thanks.
Maybe we have room for one more question. I have one question for you regarding the study where you showed that those having hot flashes were predicting, I think, negatively being a leader or a leadership position. Do you think that there is something based on the stigma having these hot flashes, or maybe because women don't want to be so public in a situation where they have hot flashes? Because leadership is a really public situation. You need to have more exposition. So which one do you think is?
Yes, so that study where it's actual employees and we find the negative relationship, it could be that. And I will say I experienced that when I was going through hot flashes. I was asked to be considered for department head, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to stand up in front of my department knowing I was likely to have a hot flash. One of the things that sets it off is stress. So when something stressful happens, or even one person entering my office raises the degrees in the room, and it sets off, right? So that's terrible for a department head or a leader. But I will still propose that even if I were opting out of leadership, it's because of stigma.
Okay.
Right? It's because I've internalized the stigma around what it means. Yeah?
Yeah.
Because if there was no stigma, oh yeah, everyone, oh, I'm having a hot flash, no
Yeah, I
biggie,
know.
right? It's
Okay.
gonna pass.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alicia. Before I introduce the next speaker, I have to take off all the bottles of water because it seems that you look like a football player giving a press conference. But I would eat yours, but well, I would like to welcome the next speaker. Marisol Lila is a professor from the University of Valencia, and she is working mainly on public attitudes toward intimate partner violence and the judicial system response. She is the designer and the head of the intervention program for the IPV perpetrators at the University of Valencia. They also work not only with victims, but also with perpetrators of this kind of violence. The program is called Programa Contexto, and she also designed and conducted several control trials to assess motivational interventions to increase participant adherence to IPV perpetrator programs. And she's currently the researcher of a Prometeo project financed by the Generalitat Valenciana for groups of excellence. So, Marisol, thank you for coming. Everything yours.
This is not working. Okay. So, well, first of all, I want to thank the organization of this magnificent conference. I have enjoyed very much all the conference, the previous conferences, and I am very happy to be here today. Some warnings before my presentation. I am clearly more smart and more funny in Spanish. Sorry for my English in advance. Another warning, I don't have the answers for my research questions. I am going to share with you many questions, but I don't have the final answer for any of these questions. Okay? We can talk, we can hypothesize, but I don't have the final answer for these questions. And of course, in the public situations, it's more probable that, more likely that I have a hot flash, and enjoy that.
Enjoy yourself.
Well, the title of my conference could be read as a little tricky, but of course, the point is gender equality the one and only solution to prevent intimate partner violence? I am expert in intimate partner violence, and we are looking here some results or data that are very strange regarding intimate partner violence and its relationship with gender equality. This is the question. Of course, because these ideas have to be clear before, gender equality is a fundamental human right. Is without doubt, this idea is clear. And there are also, among the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, one specific goal regarding violence against women, and it is considered intimate partner violence as a human right violation. Also, I think that you know that idea. Intimate partner violence against women is a significant public health problem of epidemic proportions. This picture is very famous. I think that you have seen this picture before. Around the world, all the world, women are suffering intimate partner violence in a very huge proportion. Is amazing and is incredible that so many women been suffering this kind of violence. In average, 27% of women in the world, around the world, are suffering intimate partner violence, physical and sexual. We are not talking about psychological violence. The percentage will be bigger. We are only talking about physical and sexual violence. And near 30% of the women around the world are suffering this violence. This is worse for some countries, of course. There are differences between countries, but the presence of this problem is around the world. It's not matter where you live, you can suffer this kind of violence. But we have here a kind of circularity in the idea that how can we proceed against this problem? Because when we ask what can we do to reduce the rates of intimate partner violence, the response used to be increasing the gender equality rates. But as we have seen, when we are talking about how to increase the gender equality among women and men and so on, one of the responses is reducing the rates of intimate partner violence. Then it's a kind of circularity in these arguments. And of course, as in any other problem, I think that there is another things that are in play and we have to have into account to prevent and reduce intimate partner violence. Then we will check some paradoxes regarding IPV. The first question. In societies that are more advanced in terms of gender equality, it is to be expected that women suffer less intimate partner violence. This seems right? No, of course. In the previous studies, when the studies were about countries in development, the answer was yes. In the countries less developed, more equality means less intimate partner violence. But what happens when this is asked in European countries? Surprisingly, I don't know, I think that you know this paradox before, have heard something about this paradox. But incredibly, amazing, but we have, we have the equality indexes, in European equality indexes, and among the most egalitarian countries in Europe, in the European Union, are, of course, the Nordic countries. Sweden, Finland, Denmark are the most egalitarian countries in the world. But in the first survey that was conducted around the European Union, we found, the European organizers of this, the Fundamental Rights Agency that make this survey, found a surprise, a very big surprise, because the countries with the higher levels of intimate partner violence were Denmark, the Nordic countries were among the higher rates countries. Denmark, with the average in the European Union was 22, less than the prevalence around the world. Yeah? But Denmark was 32%, the rate of Denmark was 32%, the country with more violence against women in intimate partner violence. Finland was 30%, and Sweden 28%. What is happening here? It's incredible, the data are crazy. What happens? Why in the most egalitarian countries there are the most, the higher rates of intimate partner violence? This is not understandable. Well, this fact has been called the Nordic paradox regarding intimate partner violence by Enrique Gracia. I work with him. And we are talking now about some reactions and explanations that have been, some have been clarifying, some have been denied because they are not true. But we are going to talk about some reactions and explanations. The first reaction was denial. The data must be wrong. This is impossible. Yeah. But there are some objective data that say, no, the data seems to be okay. Yeah. Because national surveys, not this European survey, national surveys in each country has the same or very similar numbers. For example, in Spain, I don't have underlined the idea that Spain is among the lowest rates country, with 13%. Yeah. Well, the numbers are very similar to those founded in the national surveys. In Spain, you know that we have around 11, in the national surveys, 11, 14, this is the range that we are moving on this kind of violence. Sweden, for example, is my country of reference to compare. Sweden, for example, has, the rates are moving about on 25, 28, 30, the national surveys. Then the data are very similar when are obtained from different sources. Also, if we look at the most clear evidence of violence, intimate partner violence, women died by their partners, we compare in 2018 Spain and Sweden, and in Sweden 20 women died, but they are they are less people in Sweden, and the rate is 2.22 women per million. Okay, In Spain, were died 51, and is a rate of less than the half of the Swedish rate. Then these are data that confirm the data obtained by the Fundamental Rights Agency. Other reactions and explanations. Some people start to saying that in the Nordic countries, people talk more naturally about IPV, intimate partner violence, and of course it is reported more. Then the data are higher because the women says more that they are suffering that. Again, no. This is not the answer. In the same FRA survey, they ask if they have, the women that answer this survey, if they have reported to the police the worst episode of intimate partner violence, and the average in the European Union was 20% of the women have reported. But in Denmark was 15%. No. In Denmark was 10%. In Finland, 10%, and Swedish were more proactive and was 17%, below the European media average. In Spain, for example, for make the comparisons, 24% of women report the situation to police. And if we look at the real official complaints and reported to the police in 2017, the rate per million comparing Sweden and Spain was also amazingly different. Around 2,000 of women have reported, this is the rate per million, have reported violence against them in front of almost 7,000 women in Spain. Then the Spanish women report more to the police the intimate partner violence episodes. Seems that this is not the answer also. Another reaction or explanation. Okay, intimate partner violence could be understood differently in different countries. And then here is some kind of, the Nordic women have the criteria to report, to say that this is violence, they report before, or they say, oh, episodes less hard are violence against me. Okay? No. Also no. We have had a project researching with a Swedish team funded by the Swedish Research Council, because they want to know what is happening in their societies to explain this. And the first step of this project was to clarify if respondents to the survey was understanding different things. And we conduct an invariance analysis with all the countries of the European Union. We have published these studies, and we found that the women answering these questions are understanding the same. And when you have the latent mean of the respondents, the Nordic countries persist in the higher positions. Then the answer is not that we are understanding differently intimate partner violence. As you see, I have I have not given any response. I am deleting possible responses. Well, we also found, this was the second level of our, the second step of our research project. Okay, but has gender equality, the country level gender equality, is explaining the differences in intimate partner violence rates? And we found with a very sophisticated methodology, because the professor in Sweden is Juan Merlo, is an international expert in multi-level analysis and so on. And we found that the country-level gender equality variable does not explain the rates or the individual risk of suffering intimate partner violence. Nothing to do with that. Yeah. We, in the last step, we have to continue to studying this, because we finished this project, but we have no the answers. And in the qualitative, the last step was the qualitative research part of because we wanted to understand this paradox. And we make some reviews about literature, Swedish literature, about intimate partner violence. We analyze the social media to understand how is understood intimate partner violence in Sweden. And we made some focus group with professionals working in this field, both in Spain and in Sweden. They give us some possible explanations, but we need to contrast this hypothesis. We need to prove that this is the explanation or the real explanation. Then, to sum up, we know that the answer has nothing to do with greater awareness or sensitivity to intimate partner violence in the Nordic countries. And here I will try to explain one personal experience there, because I was there in Sweden 6 months, sorry. Menopausal symptoms, more yeah, perfect. I have one experience that for me was very symptomatic. I was 6 months living in Sweden, and in these days was the 8th of March. I was seeing the TV, was in the pre-pandemic 8th of March. Oh. And in Spain, you know, was amazing, amazing. Women, men in the streets, millions of women and men in streets in all the cities of Spain were doing the contest, demonstration. And I was in Malmö, in a city of Sweden, and I see the demonstration of this day in Sweden. And maybe I didn't count all of the persons that were there, and maybe 50, 100, no more. I don't know if they are so proud of their gender equality standards that they have no need to make this kind of public demonstrations. I don't know, but it was amazing, because in Spain was huge. Then greater awareness, I think that no. Yeah? And sensitivity. Here in Spain, we are talking all the time on intimate partner violence, for better or for worse in some occasions. But we have a very high level of sensitivity towards this problem. but there almost you didn't notice nothing there. We know that it has nothing to do with different things, that the understanding of IPB, and we know that country-level gender equality do not explain intimate partner violence rates. Some explanations that we have found among the literature and the professionals was, okay, the backlash effect. We are achieving, or in those societies, achieving more levels of equality, of gender equality. Some men could be threatened, and they respond with violence toward these women that are asking for more equality. But we have to prove that. Maybe a question, all these explanations are complementary. Yeah? Maybe a status discordance between partners, maybe an explanation. Maybe the isolation from mainstream gender values. They, for example, in Sweden, don't disaggregate the data of the women died or the women suffering IPV by nationality. Maybe many women's, immigrant women's, working, staying in a new country with new gender roles expectatives could start asking to their partners more freedom, more equality, and the backlash effect could be there. Yeah. Other explanations, number of partners. It's said that Nordic women have more partners than women in other countries. Individualism, the idea that I have not to say nothing to another for their private life. I have not to say nothing, and I have not to be intrusive to their private life. Alcohol consumption patterns, you know that they are more individualistic also in the consuming and a huge binge drinking in some occasions. And maybe here we know that alcohol is mostly to socialize and to share with others, not to drink alone or in home, and then all happens inside of the home. Or the kind of extended family relationship they have, or the networks, social networks that they have, because they are more isolated when you compare these societies with Mediterranean societies. All these ideas can count and can explain, can make part of the explanation. Not only the rate, the country-level rate of gender equality. This is important, because gender equality is important in the relationships, but maybe the country-level gender equality is not the reason that explain these high rates of intimate partner violence. Of course, more research is needed. And now, I am okay? Perfect. I am going through two other strange questions regarding IPV and gender equality. One is with younger generations, about younger generations. The idea is, given the advances in legislation, prevention, education, now we have the most advanced societies in terms of gender equality and fighting against intimate partner violence in the history of the humanity. In terms of intimate partner violence and gender equality, we have advanced a lot. It would be expected that the younger generations that have grown in this in this environment will suffer or exercise less intimate partner violence, right? No. Okay, this is not as, it's very tricky because in the last World Health Organization report, they found that 1 in 4 adolescents, because is on girls from 15 to 19 years old, 24% of these young women are suffering or have suffered in the lifetime, as lifetime prevalence, have suffered intimate partner violence. If you ask for the last year, with this so short age, it's incredible, 16% of the women have suffered intimate partner violence, sexual or physical intimate partner violence. We studied this idea because in Spain we have the macro survey, and in this macro survey is the same. The data was alarming in terms of what is happening with the younger generations. And we found that also with invariance analysis and blah, 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 we found that, of course, the younger generations are suffering, the cohort that we analyze are suffering, is the cohort with the higher levels of intimate partner violence, sexual, physical, and psychological intimate partner violence, our younger generation. Well, we know that we have, as I have said, we have frameworks, European, international frameworks fighting against intimate partner violence. There have been many initiatives, progress in relation to this topic, but in general, the big agencies are saying that these advances are slow and insufficient. Something is happening. We are not advancing what would be expected. In Spain, here we know that we have the 2004 law, a comprehensive and multidisciplinary law, is one of the most advanced law in all Europe, that is, around the world. Include preventive, educational, social, criminal aspects, and works in many fields that, of professionals, training professionals in different fields working with IPV, really is a very nice and very well done law. But in Spain, we have the lowest rates of intimate partner violence, of course, of Europe, but the prevalence rates are continuing being the same, are stable over the years. We start with, since we have data, 11, 12, 14, but this is the range, and we don't move. We don't have rates lower. And the women that die annually are more or less, there are some years with a little bit more, some years with a little bit less, but the numbers are more or less the same. What are we doing? Well, okay, clearly something is not working with our work against intimate partner violence. Some potential explanatory hypotheses that need more research. Of course, maybe younger generations have more tolerant attitudes. Yesterday has said that, okay, collective action, in the last survey that were asked that how feminist you feel, or if you think that IPV, intimate partner violence, is a serious problem. Men, not women, men are increasing their view that, okay, intimate partner violence is not such a serious problem, or is increasing the men that say, no, I am not feminist and I am against feminist movement in the last years. I know that some political reasons could be there, and for me, working with perpetrators is very hard to have this climate, this social climate, allowing more tolerant with IPV, some politicians are denying intimate partner violence. Of course, it's a very bad climate for work with perpetrators because they feel that they have the reason. Well, maybe they have. We have to work in these attitudes that youngest generations have. Also, maybe the backlash effect. We are increasing in power, the women are increasing in power, and the youngest generation could have a sense of course, but they are gaining among us. We are the bad. We are, and maybe this is what they are feeling, and we don't know. Or also, one explanation may be the technology, the new technologies that are being used by young generations that can create new forms of intimate partner violence, new forms of control, and new forms of relationship among youngest generations. Of course, we don't know. Then we know that the preventive measures are not working, are not reducing intimate partner violence. We need to make something else. And, okay, the first thing that we need to do is to assess, to research, and to know why we are not achieving, or we are not having success in these things, in the awareness campaigns. Almost there is no campaigns that are measured. We don't assess the effectiveness of the awareness campaign or the strategies. We don't have data about that. And this is a clear problem because we can move on if we don't have the idea that what is happening with those things that we are doing. And another tricky question that is regarding, and the last question, that is regarding intervention practices. It seems logical for the public administration to invest in research and evidence-based interventions that prevent IPV, intimate partner violence. Of course, we want to fight against this problem, we have to invest in that. No? Okay. We know that IPV is a significant public health problem. And only as example, IPV is my field of research. IPV perpetrator programs start more or less at the same time. It's a recent field of study that more or less start when post-traumatic stress disorder field was born. Since then, we have around 300 randomized controlled trials, the gold standard of evaluation of effectiveness of strategies to reduce post-traumatic stress disorder. We have almost or around 300 randomized control trials. In all these years, we have around 8 to 10 randomized control trials assessing the effectiveness of intimate partner violence perpetrators programs. Why? I started working in 2006. I am the director of a Contexto program. It's a research, training, intervention, and prevention program for men convicted of intimate partner violence against women. We have treated more than 1,400 participants, men convicted of intimate partner violence. And we have a long experience trying to funding both for research and for intervene. Yeah. It has been a very long way, a very hard way. Now we are very happy with the funding that we have, also for research, both for research and for intervening. But it has been, I was very young in these photos, it has been a very hard work. I am academic in the university, and I have to fight against politicians, many meetings. I have to hear some things that you say, Marisol, contrólate. Yeah. Oh, these men had to be, all of them, in prison. No, it is not the solution. We have to work changing their behavior, changing their attitudes. We have to work with them. Another thing that we have used to no. This is here. This idea that not a single euro, or in Spanish, duro, for IPV perpetrators, or we have to spend all the money with the victims. And always I say, of course, I don't want that you give me the money for that is for the victims, of course. Please give me the money for the, in Valencia we have a bridge with flowers, and all the years, all the seasons, they change the flowers. And I always say, give me the money of the flowers, and I will do my work. I don't need the money from the victims. No. And there is always this kind of idea of, this is money for the perpetrators. No. The money is for work against the behavior and ideas of these perpetrators, and the money is for protect the women that have lived this violence and could live in the future the violence from these perpetrators. We work for the women, not for the men. But this, amazingly, don't understand it. In conclusion, it is needed increased funding for IPV intervention programs and campaigns, and we have to be very serious. We have to base our knowledge, our practices in evidence-based knowledge, and we have to make more gold standard assessment of effectiveness using randomized controlled trials. It's hard, it's a very cost and time costing, but it's absolutely necessary to invest in this kind of interventions. And just for finish, I present here the campaign that we made to bring us voluntary, because we start with convicted men, but we have now 20% of men that voluntary comes to our program, and we make a campaign to attract these men to change or to solve these problems that they have with the violent reactions and so on. And the idea is we can choose our behavior. We can choose what to behave. And we can, if you see there the Ike, and the Q, in Spanish we can choose to hurt or to love as persons. We can decide how to behave. And this is a very nice campaign. We have also the video explaining, and here you have our web pages to see the campaign and our program and our research in biostrategy. And thank you very much for your attention. And for your patience with my English.
Thank you very much. Really provoking presentation. I have to say that you looked really smart and funny in English also, so it was really nice. For beginning the debate, I want to ask you one thing. I've been thinking a lot about what you've been presenting, and politicians are always saying that sexism kills, so el machismo mata. But according to your data, this is not true, or yes? I mean, I don't know. Partner violence is due to sexism, because what you are showing is not in that direction, so.
Sexism is something different to equality, gender equality at country level.
I know.
At country level. We have to be aware of that. Sexism by itself is not it's not killing women at itself. It has to interfere, it has to be interwoven with another variables. For example, if you think that you are a very sexist man and you think that the women has been to be respected, they are inferior, of course, and we have to respect, to take care, and the women is very submiss, and she is behaving according to the role that she has, there is no problem at all. Sexism in this kind of societies is not killing anyone. But if you are not complying with the sex roles that are expected that you make, and you have a partner that is really sexist, then it's a drive, one possible drive to bring the violence in the relationship.
Probably is the focus on the social level or the individual level.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah, this is the point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, how many hands in my English? Oh.
This is a short question. I wonder if you have any comments about the big difference in rate of IPV between Norway and the other Nordic countries.
You are right, Norway is not there because it's not in the European Union, but the rates are more or less the same, and in Iceland is the same than in Sweden. The Nordic countries in general have the same rates of intimate partner violence. Yeah.
So focusing on one of the aspects of gender equality, but not gender equality as a whole, are there any research or researcher whether financial education can be an effective tool in preventing IPV, given that the lack of economic resources is often cited as a reason why some people stay in abusive relationships? And if not, what would be your personal opinion on whether if this could be a useful tool for preventing IPV?
I don't know if I understand the question. Are you asking if educational status matters for the IPV rates?
No, I'm focusing more on financial education. Like, there is a difference on your education in finance, whether you're a man or a woman. Like, for example, like women are more taught to save money instead of invest. So, like, there's a discrepancy there on how you think about money and your finances. And like, one of the reasons cited for many people who stay in abusive relationship is money, right? So I'm wondering if, if investing in women, educating women in finances could be an effective tool to prevent IPV.
Yeah. Well, this is a question, a tricky question. Yes, of course. There are many. There are research on the financial programs in countries in development, and the results are very contradictory. There are countries where the financial training and the give financial tools to women, because it says that women are more conservative with the money, are better doing the needs that the home have, and so on. And many initiatives provide to the women with the financial resources, not to the men, because the men tends to waste the money with other things that what they need. Yeah, and there are very contradictory results in this regard. There are countries where these kind of programs, educating women in financial aspects, are a very nice tool and are reducing rates of intimate partner violence, and are countries where this is exactly the contrary. And this is a question that needs to be resolved. In Spain, I don't know. I think that there is no research on these kind of aspects of financial relationship in partnership. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I wanted to ask, when you were, because you mentioned, I believe, the Nordic paradox about how northern European countries have a higher gender equality, but does this not translate in a reduction of internet partner violence? And of course, as far as you have yourself expressed, this is, I believe this has been expressed like a paradox, but it's not really a paradox, because measuring gender equality on a state level does not apply to the individual people, because you can go up from the people to the abstract, but not the other way around. Yeah. And of course, in itself, it's not really this kind of paradox. But my question would be, you've mentioned that sexism in itself, it's maybe a catalyst that works with poverty, certain other risk factors that contribute to generating this partner violence, and that apparently more awareness, more education is not reducing violence in younger generations or in general, because it's staying more or less like a flat rate. So my question here is, have we perhaps reached, let's just say, this asymptote, with this limit that we can reduce violence with approach that we are taking, and maybe our approach is limited? For example, my thought here would be, if we understand that sexism is part of the catalyst, and it's, for example, if we have, as they have mentioned, we have someone living in poverty, and the man in a heterosexual relationship works, the woman doesn't, and if she wants to work, her work will be paid less, and because rent prices are so high, you cannot live by yourself, so you cannot become independent from your aggressor. But here what happens is that, of course, sexism is acting as a catalyst, but poverty is the main mechanism that keeps this violence happening. But of course, it makes me think, why are men like this? And of course, this question is really general. This question cannot be answered easily. But I start thinking, okay, if we know that abuse happens because of certain social dynamics that happen both in private and in public, shouldn't we be studying as well which other dynamics are giving the foundation for the intimate partner violence, sexist partner violence happening, in order to reduce it? Because we are seeing that more awareness is not helping, because perhaps the rest of the foundations are not being touched upon. And of course, then there is not much change that can happen, because there is a limit you can do with cultural work when economic factors, other risk factors, psychological, I mean, it's not new to anyone who studies feminism. Men are educated to have productive roles in society, women are educated to have reproductive roles, but people, to be independent, need to have both abilities. And so you can generate a codependency between males and females that catalyze in a heterosexual relationship when other risk factors accumulate. Violence is one of the main ways in which it will explode. So isn't our approach really limited by the way we are going at it from its beginning?
I don't know if I understand the question. I will try to answer something, and if you see, no, you tell me. I think that we have to approach to this problem with a very wide perspective. We always use the ecological model, of course, and we have been very criticized for this approach to the intimate partner violence study. We think that poverty matters more than nothing, educational levels. There are some macro social aspects that matter more than anything. Yeah? And of course, sexism in the society, the tolerance of violence against women, some attitudes, victim blaming, are tolerating, are making possible that the violence continues. And all those factors are intervening, and are, the idea is this problem is more complex, much complex than a single response. And when I heard machismo mata, sexismo mata, of course, is a very simple answer to this problem. Very simple. I have been very criticized for saying things like that, because in some context you have to say always, no, the gender difference or the gender roles is the most important thing. Of course it's important, but it's not the only solution, the only question that is implied in this problem. And we have to know that to really fight against this problem. For example, and the responses of the politicians are very clear. No? When we talk with those women working on gender equality areas of university or of the council or the government, so on. And we have a study, for example, we have mapping the risk level of intimate partner violence in a city, in Valencia. We can go with this study to this kind of politician that provide the funding, because they say, no. The risk of being, of suffer intimate partner violence is only to be women. Yeah, of course. Then there is no differences among places, among different status, economical status. There are no differences for this kind of politicians that gives the money to research. And for me, it's a pity, because we are not fighting properly this problem. Yeah? And they say, no, the only risk is to be women. But if we go with the same kind of studies talking about child maltreatment, then they agree. There are different areas in the city that the risk of being the risk of being maltreated are the double or triple than in other areas, and they agree. Yes, of course, Nazareth, this area are very conflictive, are very poor, and here is where is more likely that children suffer being neglected, being maltreated, etc. But if you talk, the same places are for the risk of intimate partner violence, but they don't agree with that.
I see. So it's as well like at least the political reception and the way the political system works is itself conditioning exactly how we can deal with this problem. Because
Correct.
of course. Okay, I understand. And one thing, because I saw it was very interesting that you are having a prevention program to work with abusers so that we can reduce the risk of future of the events repeating themselves. I think that's really valuable because, of course, it's important to take care of the victims, but you have to take care of more victims not appearing in the future because you're not taking care of, the part of the equation that actually causes the harm. So, of course, my question here would be, and again, it's a bit general, but I wanted to know your opinions on here because, of course, when we intervene, the damage has already been done because the person has already abused. How can we, in your opinion, prevent these children turning into men who turn into abusers? How we can stop that from happening so that we don't have to intervene after the first abuse has taken place, or the second or the third, whenever the system, the judicial system gets in, but to prevent it from happening altogether from the root? What do you believe would be a good way, at least, of intervening here?
And can you do it briefly, because we are 20 minutes out of time, so even more complicated, yes.
Yes, of course, we always say education in the first years, but we have to make research on what kind of education is working, and if is this kind of education in the earliest years are really doing something, because we don't assess, we don't measure the effectiveness of the education that we have doing now, and it's very important to assess and research on what is effective, and do that and implement these programs that are really effective, working against intimate partner violence. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marisol. Well, the last presenter is Manuela Barreto. Manuela is Professor of Social and Organizational Psychology at the University of Exeter. Manuela wanted to emphasize that she's from Portugal, where she's from, and did his PhD at the Free University of Amsterdam, prior working in Leiden, Lisbon, and now Exeter. Her work focuses on marginalization processes and on the impact of marginalization on those who are marginalized, including women. Manuela has also performed several leadership and mentoring roles through which she has learned more about the obstacles women face in the workplace, but also how women navigate and resist gender discrimination. So, Manuela, thank you very much for coming. Your time.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Must I get closer? Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, good morning. I'll try to be a little on the fast side so that you don't lose the will to live. And, but I will try to wrap up this with a little bit of a positive twist. There will also be grimness, don't worry, we will be depressed halfway through it. But there will be also hopefully a positive twist. So I entitled my presentation Barriers to Addressing Sexism because I had no idea what I was going to talk about at that point. But it's really going to be, how do I, is it in the mouse that I should use? Yeah, with the keyboard review. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I thought, okay, I'm going to talk about something very specific, but I will give you just a very quick overview of the kinds of things that I have been doing throughout my career that are related to this idea of it's very hard to address sexism. So a lot of the studies that I have done were really looking at how the manifestations of sexism have changed throughout time. In any case, they've always been multiple, right? Some more obvious than others, but they've also changed across time. So as I once wrote in a paper, sexism has gone underground in the sense that it can really manifest itself in ways that are not easily detected. And that, of course, presents a problem for victims or for those who are stigmatized or discriminated against. It's because sometimes they can't really detect that that's what's happening, and that has negative effects. But also, sometimes they actually suspect about what's happening, but they can't recruit support because it's very hard to convince other people that that is indeed the case. We've done quite a lot of work on this, and we've written several review papers that touch on this subject. So if you're interested in that, Google me. Another problem, another reason why it's really hard to address sexism is that sexism ends up by disempowering women in ways that make it hard for them to stand up to sexism as well. So of course it's all very well. So yesterday we saw, for example, those who were lucky enough to have been here during Alessandra's presentation, saw that you need to have a lot of things to actually stand up against sexism. One of the things you need to do is a sense of injustice, a sense of anger, a sense of efficacy. Right? Now, sexism often deletes all of that from women. So if you are a target of sexism on a pervasive, if it's pervasive, if you're a target of sexism on a regular basis, then you end up having quite low self-confidence. You might also have feelings of anger. Those are not mutually exclusive, but that low self-confidence, that low self-esteem, perhaps also the belief that really you've tried, but it hasn't worked, so why should you have high sense of efficacy? And all of those things really are working against battling sexism. But there's another I'm missing the word, sorry. Despite my beautiful accent, I'm not an English native speaker. The responses that you can display when trying to combat sexism can in themselves confirm gender stereotypes, and a lot of women will try not to do that. So for example, when trying to confront a perpetrator for having said something highly sexist, I'm sure some of us have done that, and the reactions haven't always necessarily been, oh yeah, great, you are right, women are really very competent. Normally, very often the reaction is, oh, it's just a joke, you're being overly emotional, like all women are really. So there you go, you've just contributed to confirming that stereotype. And of course, women will not want to do that. And if you want to avoid that, sometimes really you have to silence yourself. And that impairs protest. So as you can see, it's really not conspiring to a very positive end when it comes to combating sexism. I'm going to talk a lot more about the last point, so I won't refer to it now, because I just very quickly want to show you a little bit of data from a prior research about these last 2 points. So this is a series of studies that we have conducted, so I'm only showing you one of the graphs that really confirms this idea that when women try to confront sexism, they are negatively evaluated. They are seen as complainers, as problematic, argumentative, particularly if people believe that sexism is rare. If people believe sexism is pervasive, that actually is fixed. Then it is acceptable that a woman confronts sexism. Now, where do you think most people are? When we actually survey people and ask them, how pervasive do you think sexism is these days in society, most people fall on the rare condition. So unfortunately, that's where we are. An example of the second to last point is avoiding confirming the stereotypes of women as, for example, overly emotional, can impair your ability to express anger and protest. So, for example, in this series of studies with postdoc Jolien van Brein, we looked at what we call the anger gap. So the gap between the anger that women feel and the anger women express when faced with sexism. And this was as a function of the kind of statement that they were facing, so the sexism that was being expressed. When that sexism was being expressed and implied that protesting or saying that was problematic would disconfirm the stereotype of women as submissive, then they did it, right? Because that part of the stereotype is disconfirmed by expressing anger. But when the sexism that they were facing was implying that women are overly emotional, then they silenced themselves and did not express the anger they felt, so the anger gap was a lot larger. So even the very sexism that you are listening to, the statement that is being voiced to you, can in itself impair your ability to respond to it. So this was just a very quick look at these studies, which, whoops, you may not have heard of because they've published relatively recently. So I have a problem with my eyes. I have to use different glasses to look at different things. So I was hoping I could navigate this without looking, without seeing. It doesn't work. But what I really want to talk about to you today is how women respond to sexual harassment and what the assumptions have been made about this. So a question that we often see asked in the newspapers, but actually also I was approached once by the police force in the UK where I work with this very same question, is why don't more women come forward? That's literally the same, the right wording. I get asked that all the time. Why don't more women come forward to complain about sexual harassment, to complain about gender discrimination, and everything else? And at the time, I just had this gut feeling that this was not the right question, but I didn't have the tools to respond to it in the right way. It felt to me that there was a very strong assumption that coming forward was the best response, but I wasn't sure that it was the best response. So this started a whole project funded by the SRC in the UK with some colleagues and PhD students, where we started interviewing women, interviewing HR professionals that often received those complaints, interviewing police officers that were at that front line that often received those complaints, and then eventually doing 2 large-scale surveys, of which I am going to detail one, but just to give you this background. And we started trying to think about what is in this question? How helpful is this question? What other questions should we be asking to actually get more productive and helpful answers? And so that's the background. Those buttons don't work. Oh, it's these ones. Okay, got it. I got it. Okay, so one of the problems I had with this kind of question was that it had all sorts of implicit messages that I wasn't happy with. So, first of all, it portrayed women as quite passive. Why don't more women come forward? Because they're doing nothing? Is that the implication? They are victimized and then they sit down and cry? Is that what happens? It really portrayed also a kind of duality and incompatibility between a more emotional aspect of coping and a more agentic aspect of coping, as if they can't go together. It also implied that coming forward was the only option, or the best option, the morally superior option, that women don't really know what they need, and that's why they don't come forward more often. And hesitating in coming forward indicates a lot of things, is diagnostic of a lot of things, including lack of credibility. Is she actually sure about what happened? That's why she's not coming forward, because she's not sure. And all of this really bothered me. And so I thought maybe what we need is to try to understand what they are actually doing when they're not coming forward. Are they doing nothing? Or are they actually doing quite a lot of things that work for them? Okay, so now it's the mouse. No, it's this. Okay. Why am I unable to figure this out? Okay, so I thought, okay, I'm a social psychologist. Let me try to use what I know to analyze this question. And through the process that I've described earlier, we started to thinking, well, psychology does have something to say about this. First of all, we know about human needs. We know that we have multiple human needs. The need for justice is one of them, and sometimes for some people a very strong one. I can tell you that I have that need very strongly most of the time. But there's all sorts of other needs we have as well, like the need for safety, the need for autonomy, the need for competence, the need for relatedness. just some of them. We also know from very classic studies like Maslow's pyramid, I'm sure everyone in the room has seen something like this before, that they are somewhat hierarchical, somewhat. This is not the way it works, by the way. This pyramid is very pretty, but it is, it's not like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. But there is some sense in this idea that there are some needs that are more basic than others. That if you haven't eaten, you're not going to appreciate a beautiful movie. If you haven't, or rather, I don't mean eaten once. I mean, it sounds like me. I love eating, so yeah. But I mean, if you're not eating, if you don't have money to eat, right? If you are not safe, justice comes after. It is not the first step. So. Okay, clearly we have a lot of needs. Not all of the needs should be equally prioritized. And satisfaction of some needs can actually threaten the satisfaction of other needs. So if we go back to what we're talking about, if your need for justice can only be satisfied by risking your need for safety in many times, in many cases. And we've just been talking about one of the cases in which that's very often the case. So what I thought was that the question that we started with is a question that is not contextualized in a real person's life, in the amount of needs that a person in that situation has, and the contingencies of those needs. And I think we need to do more to understand those. So the basic research questions we had in this overall project, but more specifically in the 2 survey studies that I'm going to speak about now, were what are the needs that those who have been sexually harassed have? What actions do they take? And how do those actions work for them? So not assuming that any particular action is the right one. So we did 2 surveys, and the main difference between the 2 surveys is that the first one had some exploratory aspects. So we did not want to assume that we knew all the needs people have. We did not, even though we had already done quite a few interviews by then, we did not want to assume that we knew all the actions people take. So we had closed questions, yes, but we always started with an open box. So what were the kinds of needs you experienced at that time? What were the kinds of things that you do at that time? And then we have the closed options. Of these, which ones did you do? And then we polished all of that and did a second survey where all of that open information was then transformed into survey items so that we could have a more easily demonstrable responses, comparable responses that we could actually use to try and influence next to policymakers, because numbers are always a big thing. In this study, so these 2 studies had the same design, and a key to these studies was also we were comparing the views, the needs, and the actions expressed by those we called experiences. So people who said, I did experience sexual harassment in the past, and those who we categorized as imaginers. People who did not experience, but were imagining experiencing. And the reason why we did that is that those who haven't experienced are really imaginers. That's what we are. We are either one or the other. And people who have a lot to say about how women should respond to sexual harassment are either experiencers or imaginers. And we want to see, is there a gap between these 2? And how are those who are making decisions without ever having experienced, how are those seeing these needs and these actions compared to those who have actually experienced it? Crucial, actually, is that we had both men and women in these studies. We had both men and women as experiencers and as imaginers, and we did not find any differences in the responses of men and women, so I will not separate those. The reason why I still think it's applicable for this seminar is that sexual harassment is a lot more common in women than in men. But it is also prevalent in men, particularly sexual and gender minorities. And let's not lose sight of that. But it is a lot more prevalent in women. So the survey asked, the very first question was, what does sexual harassment mean to you? So again, we did not want to presume that we knew what people think sexual harassment is, but we also did not want to impose a definition on them. We wanted to know what they had in mind. And so we asked an open question, but then we also had some categories. So, how many people were present? Was it just one person? Was it in public? Was it in an educational context? Was it at work? Was it in the street? Was it a single event or was it a repeated event? So we had all sorts of questions to try and characterize these experiences and also to have an idea of how they are imagined. Have you experienced this thing that you are describing? Yes, no. What needs did you experience at the time? What needs would you imagine having experienced at the time? So the questions only differed for the two groups in that way. What actions did you take at the time? What actions did you imagine you would have taken at the time? How satisfied? So this was need by need. I will show you in a minute in more detail. How much was this need satisfied by the actions you took? And then a whole bunch of well-being items that I will detail in a second. So I'm showing you these, and I don't know, not super well, but you can have some idea. The reason why I want to look at this in detail is, of course, the whole point of this study is that people have multiple needs, and the need for justice isn't only one of them. So I do want you to look at what the needs are. So these are the list of needs that they were presented with, and remember, they were fine-tuned through qualitative research as well as the previous survey where people added their own needs to the needs we had identified. And through factor analysis, we identified 4 factors, but that's only for analytical purposes because really they are subtly different even within those factors. And there are 3 items that didn't fall on any factor. And so you do have those justice needs in there. To confront the perpetrator, to get an apology, to make a formal report, to see justice in the world, to express myself. But we also have communal needs, like, to feel that my life mattered, to feel that my life had meaning, to know that others cared about me, to feel part of a community, to feel accepted by others. And you had safety needs, to be believed, to be safe, to get away from the perpetrator, to be supported, to be respected. And more agentic needs, to make decisions for myself, to be in control, to show that I'm capable, to feel less powerless. And then, as I said, 3 that didn't really clearly fall on only one factor or on any factor, for things to go back to normal, really as simple as that. To talk to someone and to be understood. So this is the range of needs. To come forward is only one of those. Even within the justice component is only one of those. And the actions, what actions did people take? Again, this is the list that we're presented with, informed by the qualitative work, but also by people's own additions of their needs to our study. To do nothing. Some people did nothing. To tell nobody. To tell friends and family. Confronted the perpetrator. I told a colleague. I wrote about it online. I sought information and support online. I contacted the police. I make a formal complaint. Sorry, that's a typo. I told my GP, which is a doctor, to seek counseling. I contacted a helpline. I contacted HR. I contacted the union, which is the UK loves unions. I talked to a religious leader. Or another action. The talk to the religious leader is in between brackets because nobody picked it. Maybe it says something about the UK, but nobody picked it. So we did not continue with that one in future studies. And then the need satisfaction was going back to each single need once again and say to what extent was this need met. So again, the list of needs was repeated by the actions that you took. And then well-being. So, and how do you feel right now? As another way of looking at need satisfaction would be they are actually feeling better right now. So we had a whole bunch of measures that I won't go into detail, but affect, life satisfaction, personal self-esteem, satisfaction with your relationships, optimism, post-traumatic growth, emotional reactivity and numbing. So all of the kinds of things that would be relevant after a traumatic event. And so what were the results? So first some descriptive results, so you have some idea of what our sample was experiencing. So over half the sample reported experienced sexual harassment. 42% was in the younger adult age group, 25 to 34. And then the next most prevalent was even younger, so what we call emerging adults, 18 to 24. And then the next group was the slightly older, so middle age, really. Over half of the sample was from the UK, which is not surprising because the study was done in the UK, from the UK, even though we tried to go out, but it was from the UK. Then Europe and then North America. The study was done in English, so that is also not surprising that it was mostly English-speaking countries. And then we also had people, precisely because we didn't give them a definition of sexual harassment, we wanted also people to rate how negative that experience had been for them, the real or the imagined one. And the experiences actually rated it as less negative, presumably because the imaginers had a very prototypical thing in mind that was quite extreme. So the characteristics of the event, as I said before, we asked them to characterize the event in a few ways, and there's not a lot to say in here except that there's all sorts. So these were the experiences, so physical, non-physical, both kinds of things present, work, street, nightlife, some in school, fewer online. Perpetrator, usually one, but in some cases multiple perpetrators, and usually a stranger, but sometimes a colleague or a boss. And usually a single occurrence, but sometimes a repeated occurrence. These are the experiences, so these are people reflecting on what's actually happened. The imaginers were all over the place. They had everything. It was, physical, it was non-physical, it was everywhere. So because, of course, they were imagining, so they were imagining all sorts of different things. So not very important, the comparison at this point. Now, when we look at experiences needs, what I'm showing you here is without controlling for anything. It's worth noting that when I control for the evaluation that they made of the event that they described, I get exactly the same pattern. It doesn't change at all, whether or not they are looking only at, whether or not we're partialing out that effect. It also doesn't matter whether I only look at people who said this was a negative event. It also doesn't matter, it's the same thing. So the experiences needs, once again, there were a range of them. So they rated those needs quite highly, except for the need for justice, which was under the scale midpoint. But, it's not zero. But it is below the scale midpoint, whereas the need for safety, the need for agency, and the communal needs, they were all above the scale midpoint. Imaginers differed mainly in the need for justice. So communal needs, safety needs, and agency needs were very similar to those of the experiencers, but they thought the need for justice was a lot more important. And I think now you begin to see why it's important to take this double perspective, because now you start seeing that's why people ask that kind of question, because they imagine that justice is so much more important than it actually is at the time when things are happening. I'm not talking about later on, I'm talking about at the time. What actions did they take? So the experiences, above all, either did nothing, or told someone, or told nobody, or confronted the perpetrator. And those were the most popular actions. There was a little bit of everything else, but those were the most popular actions. At the end, you see just a recoding of all of those responses into an action versus an inaction that we used for other purposes. But at the beginning, you see what the kinds of things experiences actually did. Imaginers imagined they would tell friends and family more often than experiences actually did, that they would tell a colleague more often than experiences actually did, they would seek information online, they would file a formal complaint, they would contact the police, all of those, the more agentic justice-based needs, based on the more agentic justice-based needs, than experiences did. Experiences' need satisfaction was, however, fairly high. They were fairly happy with what they did. Imaginers were even happier with all the different things that they did. And so we did additional analysis, I've already mentioned this, so there were no differences in well-being between these two groups. And controlling for incident evaluation did not change anything. Looking only at those people who said the thing I'm writing about or imagining was negative didn't change anything. So what do I want to conclude from this study? Well, there's many things you can conclude from this study. First of all, people who are actually sexually harassed have a whole variety of needs. The need for justice is one of them, and it's an important one. I'm not going to deny that, and I'm not downplaying how important it is eventually. But I am downplaying how important it is in the immediate aftermath of sexual harassment. Justice is neither the only nor the strongest need that victims experience. They also report a wide variety of actions. Women are not doing nothing when they are not coming forward. Women are not these passive little beings that sit in the corner and suffer sexual harassment. They do a whole variety of things, and importantly, those things work for them. They felt their needs were satisfied in that initial stage of after sexual harassment. There's also a fair discrepancy between actual and imagined experiences, particularly around justice needs and justice-based actions. But there's a fairly accurate ranking, though, fairly accurate ranking. So those who are sexually harassed might not need or do what others expect them to, and it's not for us to judge what works for them. But they can be effective for them, the actions that they do. And I think what we do need is to recognize that those other needs also need to be supported. And people need to have a way of resources to access support for those other needs. At the moment, if someone comes forward within my workplace, for example, and says, I want to report sexual harassment, there's a mechanism to support that. I'm not going to say it always ends well, it doesn't. But there is a mechanism to support that particular need and that particular action. If someone comes forward and says, you know, I was sexually harassed by this colleague, but I really don't want to do anything about that, there's actually nothing that we can offer this person. We don't know what to do with this person, right? So we need to recognize that there's these other needs and that those need to be supported as well. We need to stop assuming that coming forward is the right thing to do, and we also need to stop interpreting that not coming forward means something. It means, for example, that it wasn't that serious. It means, for example, that perhaps it's not true. It means, for example, that the person isn't even sure about whether that was real harassment or not. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that people have needs that are primary to that. And so, of course, we need to avoid interpreting time lapses. And, you know, you only need to Google. You actually only need to open the newspaper, and there will be cases being spoken about. Right now, in the UK, the big one is this Russell Brand case at the moment, but I'm sure in Spain there's the football one. We all have those, don't we? It's so rich. We all have those cases, and the question is asked every single time. No, it can't be true because they didn't complain about it immediately, or they haven't complained about it in 10 years. It's because people have different needs at that immediate time. So, more broadly, I think we need to consider that there are significant barriers to addressing sexism, and that includes neoliberal expectations that place the burden on the victim to recover and to address sexism themselves. Truly just societies need to address not only the unequal distribution of burden, but also the unequal distribution of resources, and to avoid secondary victimization. And it's recognize everyone's rights to equally access dignity, safety, respect, and healthy relationships. And this is what I wanted to tell you today, luckily in time for discussion.
Thank you, Manuela. Questions, comments, please?
Just one quick question. Did you look at the severity of the events that people reported, their own sense of that severity? Because I could imagine that some of the reactions would differ depending on that?
Yeah, so that's what the negativity item was about. Sorry if I was unclear about that. So the negativity item was how bad was that experience, from really bad to actually quite positive. You can imagine that things like, what in Spanish you call piropos, things like catcalling in the street, some people find that flattering. And some people would say, I was sexually harassed because someone catcalled me in the street, but that was nice. So obviously we had to measure that, and that's why I said that controlling for that didn't make any difference, and deleting, or rather excluding people who said it was neutral or positive, so focusing only on those who said it was negative, also didn't make a difference, because in reality most people were thinking of something negative.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I wanted to thank you for making a study in which you made an explicit effort not to induce any answers from the participants and openly, express your curiosity and interest of exactly, okay, how does this work? Am I actually getting some kind of bias into this before designing the experiment? So I think that's actually pretty important, because sometimes we do that and then the results are skewed and are not as useful. One thing that I wanted to ask about what you meant, what you expressed is, this is of course an idea, have you tried as well adding an item, because you mentioned that there are people who are imagining, people who actually suffered, went through the event and express what they did. The people who express what they did you consider leaving room for, as well as their actual experience, space for them to express, just like the imagined ones? What exactly would they have done now? Like, okay, now that I know how everything went, would I deprioritize certain things, reprioritize other ones, so that to see not only, okay, what you did, but now that you have that knowledge and you have lived through it, what have you learned anything that make you change the initial response that you had?
No, that's a very good point. We didn't. No, we didn't. In the interview part, we had a little bit of that kind of information, and to be honest, people weren't saying very different things. I think it's important to realize that when you are, harassed in a way that is very upsetting to you, you do look around a bit. You tend to talk to people, and one of the functions of talking to people is precisely to find out what are the possible ways to go and how do they work for people. So, again, women aren't making these choices because they're stupid and don't know what to do. They're making these choices because actually they've assessed risks and benefits. They've looked around. And so when they go into it, they normally have some information, some level of information. But what that touches on is another issue, which I kind of alluded to as I was speaking, is that our dream was to make a longitudinal study where we could actually go back to people later on and see the changing needs and the changing actions, and how different needs are actually emerging at different times. So the need for justice, I would imagine, would be emerging later as much stronger as the woman recovers her strength and her sense of having a place in the world and a sense of confidence. But we didn't have the ability to do that because, as you can imagine, it's not very easy to access people who come forward and say, I've been sexually harassed and I want to talk about it over and over again.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Someone in there, the back.
Hi, I just want to make one question, and I know that we're taking into account the victims' needs in here, but playing a little devil's advocate, shouldn't we encourage for justice to be a much important need than it is, taking into account a more collective well-being point of view? Like, shouldn't we encourage them to make justice of the situation they're in, because it will make a better society? because you will point out that there are perpetrators and they are doing that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, it's an excellent point, and obviously one of our greatest fears when we published this paper was that the press would take it and say, look, it's not needed, justice is not needed. And of course that is not at all the message that we want to convey. What we want to convey is that it's unreasonable to expect that to be the focus in the aftermath of an event that is highly traumatic. It's also unreasonable to expect that if a woman does come forward, or a man, as I said, our sample had men and women, and it does happen to men too. It's unreasonable to expect that if someone comes forward at that point, that they're going to be giving the best evidence, that they're going to be presenting themselves in the most credible way, etc. Because we all know trauma affects how credible you seem. You know? So actually, the ultimate good that you're talking about would not be served as well if people come forward too quickly. I mean, that's an empirical question. You know, I'm not basing myself on data by saying that necessarily, but what I'm saying is that the need for justice is still there, but it needs to be attended perhaps later on, and women need to be supported to get there. You know, and that middle support is what's not present. There's very little. I mean, in the UK, there's a few online charities or phone charities that you can access to have some support. That's basically it. Many countries, there isn't even that, you know. But thank you for allowing me to clarify that is not what I meant. Because I understand that's very easy to hear.
More questions?
Who wants to close the symposium with the last question? Yeah.
The last one, maybe.
Thank you. It just occurred to me because you mentioned it at the closure of your speech, but presentation, sorry. But you mentioned this about, well, the Luis Rubiales case here in Spain, Russell Brand here right now in UK. We have also always this kind of climates in which the media is always echoing some kind of sexual harassment, sexual assault case. And I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned that, of course, our perception of what exactly and how exactly victims react and how it works is quite different from what actually happens. And I would think, isn't the paper, of course, of treating at times sexual scandal like a spectacle in society, creating this climate of, for example, of believing that justice is the most important thing, the thing that must come first, when in reality it's not, and the use that we are doing of creating that climate perhaps is counterproductive to actually helping the victims. Because as you mentioned, if you prioritize justice, you are living on the side of the needs that are more immediate, and even then you are not actually, in the long run, creating a more just society. So, I don't know.
I mean, look, I don't know because I don't really study media, the impact of media, but I think I can speculate that you definitely have a point there, but at the same time, a lot of these cases, and Russell Brand is one of them, the Spanish case is not, it's a different one, but the Russell Brand case is one of those. They are historical. Now, interestingly, historical is anything for this more than 12 months, so you can imagine when women come forward after 12 months, and they're suddenly considered historical cases, and they have to go through a whole much slower and more difficult process, but anyway, that's another point. These cases that are considered historical, basically, have had that time for the victim to come to terms to what is it that they need and how are they going to go about it in the best way for them. And they do serve a very positive end, which is that of shaming, naming, shaming, and stopping that particular person and those who are protecting them. So I think it's not as simple as that, but of course it does increase the stakes and the potential costs for victims who are then discredited. So yeah, it's complicated, of course. I don't have a final answer to that. Anyway, thank you very much as far as I'm concerned, and I guess it's time for us to also applaud the organizers and thank them for
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you very much. Well, just a few words before we begin. Oh, sorry, before we finish. We are not going to begin again, don't worry. I would like to thank again to all the speakers for coming. You don't really know, but they have a busy agenda, and it's always complicated to be again in these in-person activities. Everyone is used now to be online. And I would like to thank all the students that has been participating in the debate. You have really enriched with your thought-provoking questions and help us to think about these issues in a different way. So don't be shy in participate. I really encourage you, and I think you have a really reached a really high level in your questions, so thank you. And I'm truly inspired by the discussions that we have this today. The presentation were really good, and I think I would like to close only with a couple of words. Try to take the spirit of these 2 days, try to think about this gender gap, gender issue, and apply it to your daily life. Maybe in that way we can have a more equal world in terms of gender, but as far as we have seen this today, maybe it's not going to work for specific things, but at least it's an issue of human rights. So it doesn't matter, it's not going to decrease the intimate partner violence, or maybe it's not going to decrease the sexual harassment, but it's something that we have to do. So that was the goal of the seminar. I hope you enjoy. I hope it somehow inspire you, and thank you very much for coming. By the way, the pack of credits is outside.